If someone feels they have to be positive 100% of the time, they do not feel permission to actually share what's really happening in their mind and their heart. Because even though people can try to be positive 100% of the time, typically your mind will wander into the dark corners and wonder. So it can silence a patient, it can silence a family, and then what happens between the patient and the family is there becomes a chasm.
Hi, I'm Cian Xiao.
And I'm Sammy Winemaker. We talk about ways to put the human back at the center of care.
The Waiting Room Revolution starts right now.
Again, welcome to the Waiting Room Revolution podcast. We are lucky to have Maggie back with us. And
Hello.
hi, Maggie.
Thanks for having me back.
Oh, our pleasure. We couldn't do it without you, actually. So today we're going to be talking about walk two roads. It's really going to be a great episode because this is the first of the 7 keys. I'll remind everyone, the 7 keys are the secret between having an illness journey that is in the dark and one that is in the know. And so we have come up with 7 keys to bridge that gap or to prevent people from going down an in the dark illness experience. And the key to all of them is these skills are to be used right from the beginning of the diagnosis. And today we're going to be talking about key number 1, walk two roads.
So, Cian, I know for a fact that this is your favorite key. So, can you remind those of us who might not know, what is walk two roads?
Yeah, so I think this is the most important key, and that's why it's the first, I guess. And it is really about balancing hope and reality. And what we define the 2 roads is hoping for the best and planning for the rest. And it was so important it became the name of our book, obviously. And it is it's combating or the antidote to this idea of toxic positivity. You know, when someone is ill, everyone around them becomes very positive and hopeful. And you see it in the advertising in the hospital, the family, gathers around them. And of course, the patient wants to be hopeful too. And I think there is this strong belief that if you aren't hopeful or, thinking about the treatment, then you're giving up. And, it really feels like we aren't able to think about planning ahead. It's sort of like these are attention, but walking two roads resolves the tension by saying you can do both. They coexist, and they can, in fact, hope can strengthen if we do it right.
Yeah, you know what? I meet a lot of people who actually think that if they don't think positively 100% of the time, that they're going to bring on something negative or will something negative to happen. And, that hasn't been my experience with patients and families. So most people are very relieved when they get permission to both be hopeful, but also think about the what ifs, the just in case scenarios, or what if it doesn't go the way I'm hoping? Then you cover all roads.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. And I know from even in my own family, we always are the cheerleaders, and sometimes it's really hard. So, like, why is this so important, would you say?
I mean,
Yeah,
you go ahead first, Sammy. Go ahead.
it's okay. Well, like you said, Cian, if we are only positive and always thinking about, where this is going to work out, I'm going to beat this. Positivity is also synonymous with this battle metaphor of I have to fight, and I can never, ever, ever consider the possibility that I'm scared or worried or et cetera, et cetera. I just have to perpetually keep going. That, first of all, is exhausting. And it's also silencing. If someone feels they have to be positive 100% of the time, they do not feel permission to actually share what's really happening in their mind and their heart. Because even though people can try to be positive 100% of the time, typically your mind will wander into the dark corners and wonder. So it can silence a patient, it can silence a family, and then what happens between the patient and the family is there becomes a chasm, which is like a code of silence that we're all part of a charade of positivity and communication is completely constipated.
And I think that is exactly, it's sort of this black or this white. And that's why patients and families tell us it feels like they fell off a cliff when sort of like, or they got the rug pulled out from them when they suddenly realize, um, this is where there's nothing else we can do. That kind of philosophy comes from. And it's never that, it's that this illness will change over time. And so one ought to be constantly planning, preparing, and adapting in a way to it. And it's not an easy thing to do. I don't think where any of us are saying that we shouldn't be positive and there's not a role for cheerleading. It's just that we can't only do that. And I think we have to be realistic. And if it's okay, Maggie, I want to share um, a story in the New York Times that I think really illustrates why this problem perpetuates. Because this idea of palliative approach to care, or even just wanting to be hopeful, hasn't is not a new concept. But even in this day and age, so it's still out there. This idea of that medicine will save us all, and it was a story by this writer. Her name is Sarah Wildman, and her daughter had cancer. And it was actually an audio story, but she's written in the Times over the past year, the 4 years that her daughter had the cancer. And the last when it was just last month, and the title of it was "When We Face the End of Life, It's Sadness We Should Fear." It's not sadness we should fear; it's regret. And she talks about how uh, and it's an audio story, so it's really gripping because you can hear her talk about her daughter. Orly is her name, and they were on a beach in Miami, and her daughter Orly asked her, "Is this the best I'm ever going to feel?" And she didn't know how to answer. And of course, she did the natural thing a mom would say: "Is of course not. Don't say that. We've got so many things to be hopeful for." But when her daughter eventually passed, she realized no, that she was right. It was the best, and she reflects on the disappointment that she never was invited to the conversations. She didn't know how to talk about it. And the only thing that gave her a bit of comfort was a friend of Orly. Orly texted her friend and texted her and said, "I know I'm going to die, but and everybody dies, and I will just die a bit sooner than everybody else. But isn't it a great opportunity for me? Because I know that I'm dying, that I can focus. Everyone's focused on how much time I have, but they're forgetting to live." And so Orly, as a child, is understanding this, but no one else is talking about her. And so she just laments that, even though she had a nurse in the family, um, no one was inviting them to conversation. And so, she talks about how she doesn't feel sadness more. She feels sadness, of course, but she feels regret more. And it's just, we see it all the time that even people in the system, i.e., doctors and nurses, when it happens to them, they don't know how to talk about it.
I think that's a really good point because ultimately what it does is steal away people's time. So you don't get the opportunity to do the things maybe that you really wanted to do because you're so wrapped up in this positivity and not talking about what's happening and therefore not planning for just in case, and you end up spending all of your time chasing this rainbow really, and then at the end when the gig is up you look back potentially and say, I wish I would have known this sooner. I wish I would have done things differently. Maybe I wouldn't have gone for that procedure or that treatment had I known. But everyone was so busy cheerleading around me. I made decisions that weren't fully informed because I was silenced with people's well intentions. So it's important for lots of reasons, Maggie.
Yeah, no, I really see that. And, I'm curious. So this is the first key that the audience got to know. So have
Yeah.
you had a chance to hear from any of our listeners or people that you've run into at events? Have they been able to use this key and what has it done for them?
Yeah, so Sian, do you want to talk about Steven Starkman?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is an episode that definitely comes to mind. Like, so we interviewed a person, Steven Starkman, a couple seasons ago, and he had read the book and was using the keys, and so we followed up with him later of how it was helping him. And when he passed away of September of I think 2023, his wife wrote us, and she said, "Finding the keys changed the way we lived this past year and how we prepared for the future. And before, Stephen was scared to ask questions and didn't know what to expect of his cancer journey. And as a caregiver, didn't know what to do. And the podcast and the book, they helped me to realize that I needed to ask important questions while I still had the time, not
Mhm.
only from the doctors and the palliative care team, but also to make sure I knew what Stephen's wishes were all the way along so I could
Mhm.
help navigate, advocate, and honor the way he wanted to live and
Mhm.
die. And she gave us permission to read that quote out. But it had just so many of the key elements in a very eloquent way. Just it's about
Mhm.
living, not dying, and it's about the time. And we can't
Yeah.
change this, but we can change the experience.
Sian, that just makes me think about Sammy and I had the pleasure of attending the ALS conference back in December. And I feel like this crowd really did walk two roads. I mean, they were living and they all know that, what's at the end of the road for them. But at the end of the day, maybe they weren't talking about dying at this conference, but they were just having fun. They were talking to each other, they were learning from their peers, they were just really celebrating the fact that they were there in the moment. And that crowd did such a great job of walking to Rose, and I can really see that now.
Yeah, that's so true, Maggie. It had such a lively, wonderful atmosphere, that conference, but they but everyone there was in the know. They understood
Mhm.
that ALS goes a certain way, but in the meantime, we're gonna be the best that we can be. I had a home visit the other week, and there was a younger woman in her 50s with a progressive illness, and we caught her luckily when her husband wasn't there, because she told us that she finally felt that she could speak openly without the family around, because they don't want her to speak about anything except getting better. Yet she is wondering about what to expect. She is wondering about what to plan for. She wants to know what she will experience and how that's going to affect her husband and her grown children. So, it was lovely because I used this metaphor of inviting her to walk both roads and helping her to feel comfortable that as human beings, we can do many things at once. We're incredible, actually. We can be hopeful and entertain other emotions as well, fear, anxiety, et cetera, et cetera. And we certainly can plan ahead. And even when people get planning and the information isn't exactly what they wanted to hear, they still feel that they can land and move forward. So, this particular woman, we were able to describe to her how hopeful we were that her current treatment was going to give her more time. Uh, she knew her illness wasn't curable, but we also talked about when there is a time that the treatment stops working, what her body will signal and what that is that she's going to experience. And what does that mean for supports that she can have in her home? What other care settings are available to her? What is going to be the role of her husband? You know, and what is not going to happen was also a big part of this conversation, because entertaining the what ifs is also making sure that the things that you think are going to happen, that you're scared to ask about, get addressed. Like things like assuming there's going to be terrible pain or that you're going to suffocate. All of these things, if you're just permanently positive, you don't get the chance to untangle and address and ultimately feel way better. There isn't a person that I have invited to walk two roads that hasn't felt better having done it. And it's not just a one-time conversation. You need to walk two roads at as much as you can during the entire illness journey, just constantly toggling back and forth between hopeful positivity and, well, let's just cover all bases kind of attitude. Um, and I could tell at the end of the visit, she felt better. And she, like a lot of other people, thanked us, gave me a big hug, and off I went.
And if you, to our listeners, if you want to hear what it means to walk two roads early in your journey, Sammy, you were just featured in a CBC podcast, White Coat, Black Art, which is a national podcast in Canada led by Brian Goldman. And he went on a home visit with you.
Yeah.
And, you know, you met a family who met you early on in an illness, a long journey. And you could hear from each, the father and his two daughters, the impact. And I remember very clearly one of the daughters talked about how, because she knew what was happening. They planned, they were prepared. They wasn't the panic, they were proactive, but she got to have these conversations with her mom that she wouldn't have gotten to have. And that is really what it's about. It's about making use of the time because you're in the know. So
Mhm.
people want to hear what is the impact from a very human story away. That had a really, people can search for that. But I just want to just build on that ALS conference. Like,
Wait. The other sister, Molly, she in that episode described her father-in-law's experience, which was different than her mom's, which was in the know. Her father-in-law, the whole experience, because they didn't get an opportunity to walk two roads, felt like one crisis after another. And she compares the difference in terms of their families' um, quality of life with their loved one, the difference between someone who walks two roads and a family who doesn't walk two roads. It's completely different.
yeah. And in a
Yeah.
way, I mean, we call it walked roads as like a metaphor, but it's really like another way of saying resilience or adaptation because we're adapting to, our new life in a way. And um, uh, yeah, so I think I lost my train of thought there,
You were
but
gonna
I
say something else about the ALS conference. You wanted
oh
to.
yeah, the ALS conference. Like what I found so interesting was all the presentations from all the other speakers were about adaptations. Like they had a hotel suite with tons of innovations of how to help people adapt and live differently, whether it's a bed or watch TV or to help them feed and keep their head straight. There were so many amazing ideas of which they spread all the they're spreading through this conference and sharing ideas with each other. But they never used the word palliative care or death and dying. It was just about adaptation and living. And so, what I think is so great about the movement and Walk Two Roads is that we come from the palliative care world and the palliative care approach, but patients and families can walk two roads and they don't have to be, they can focus on the living part, which is what they want. And we don't have to introduce it or hide it behind or protect it, gatekeep it behind this thing called a palliative care specialty. And I
Mhm.
and I think that's what I really wanted people when they listen to that episode to understand that you can get that kind of care and be in the know, and you don't need to. If you never meet a Sammy or you don't have Sammy in your community, um, you can still be in the know and
Yeah.
get a better experience.
That reminds me of a podcast episode that you did with Dr. Erin Gallagher a few seasons ago, and she talked really about how she does this with her patients. Are there any other podcast episodes that we can turn the listeners' attention to that really talk about this key and how it's done?
Well, I mean, the
I'm,
very first season that we dropped goes over all the
Well,
keys. And so definitely season one called Walk Two Roads is one of the episodes that comes to mind.
yeah, I mean, Erin Gallagher is, a close friend of ours, but brilliant because she gives like the language of and the ways that she introduces it as a family physician. So she obviously has training in specialty, but the words and the phrases she uses, like, helping people to just ask them, what brings you in here and why do you think that you're seeing changes? Like, what do you think is happening? And letting people speak and share what's on their mind really is such a simple and powerful tool that anyone could use, any healthcare provider. We had Red Hoffman on the show, who is a surgeon who specialized in palliative care, but was also a patient and a caregiver. And she talked about being on the other side, and she talked about the tips of how she interacted with her colleagues, and how to tap into the human part of care as a key piece. And the other one that sticks out for me is Jennifer O'Brien, who wrote a book called Hospice Widow's Wife. And if, Walk Two Roads is not something that makes sense off your tongue, like she just talks about the idea of, hey, we're in precious time now. Like we are
Mhm.
entering a final chapter, and that chapter could be very long. Actually, that whole idea of some chapters are long and some chapters are short. We heard from our Indigenous colleagues and First Nations colleagues from some of our other work, but they talk about people's chapters being long and short. But that, hey, you're in precious time, and just that phrase, people understood what it meant, that we have to think differently.
I think it's called Hospice Doctor's Widow.
Ah, thank you. Sorry,
That's okay. Um, Yeah.
So I think I wanted to turn our attention to a little bit of the frequently asked questions that we get. And I want to talk about uncertainty. And this is a question that we get a lot of times from people at events or that write into us and advice for how to deal with uncertainty because it's very difficult for some people. So if you have any advice to share.
So I mean, one of the things that comes to mind is I was at this conference and they were talking about uncertainty, and I was banging my head because I'm like, the one thing we can be certain of is that all of us are going to die. But as I thought about it more, I did come to appreciate that there is, for every patient and family, there is an uncertainty of how things will unfold. And this, it is a way, it's another way of saying hoping for the best and planning for the rest. They are holding on to the hope of what they can have. So I can appreciate that. And I think, I don't know if I have advice, but I can just talk about how important it is to maintain both roads. And in a way, like one of the frequently asked questions is about how do you do this? And so I have a story of someone that I met. We were and a lot of the people we know are clinicians and actually palliative care experts. And this person is a palliative care expert, and their partner was recently diagnosed with ALS, a motor neuron disease. And the partner is a very successful, intelligent, they're both very intelligent and well schooled and successful. And he's like a CEO of a company. And so, ALS is one of those conditions where it might affect uh, your control, obviously your physical control, but also sort of the filters that you have. And so you might kind of just say stuff that's sort of not appropriate. And so basically the tension here was, at what point do you stop working and give up everything that is very, very important to this person? Because at that point, you should step down before, this was the advice, before the board sort of says, hey, you've sort of embarrassed yourself. But I realized that that's like a form of walking into roads. Like, what was important to her partner who has ALS is work, having meaning. And so walking to roads, how do you do that? Is talk about why that's important to you and what are other ways we can fulfill that without you feeling like it's either you're the CEO and in charge and responsible for everything, and then it becomes zero. It's so black and white. And I guess walk to roads is finding ways to achieve the same goals without it, in different ways, like the adapting, so that you can still be who you are without feeling like you're giving up. I think that's what I've realized is people are holding on to that idea of who they are without realizing that we have to adapt and we can achieve those things in different ways.
Mhm.
I think with uncertainty that, the more information people can gather, uh, the less uncertain they're going to feel. There is always going to be an element of uncertainty, but people don't realize there is a ton of information out there to help you feel grounded. Um, so we teach people how to extract that information, how to find their voice, and to gather all bits and pieces so that they can feel like they're not suspended in limbo.
Mhm.
Uncertainty is a difficult place to live in, but it is what it is. But we can make it a 3 out of 10 instead of a 10 out of 10.
That's great. And one of the most common questions that we get asked, and maybe Sammy, you could take a crack at this, is what do you do when one person in the crew wants to walk two roads, but the other one doesn't?
Well, I know what I do. From a care provider perspective, I will often just label it. I will invite people to understand what's happening with their illness. I will ask them what type of person they are. Are they the kind of person who likes information? How about information about the future? Are you a planning kind of person? And inevitably, in a room with more than one person, you're going to get different answers. And the goal is not to force all people to be able to walk two roads at the same time and entertain, hope and the reality and truth of the situation. The goal is to make sure everyone is invited and for us to respect everyone's different style. So if I do find that, and this happens a lot, that for example, one partner, let's say, wants to walk two roads and the other one doesn't, then I say you both have different styles. These are the ways you've walked your life, and we can talk about that in another episode. And I offer to walk 2 roads with the one and, continuously invite the other one, if and when they're ever ready, that they too can walk 2 roads. I also explain to them the benefits and the risks of not walking 2 roads, and then they can make their decision.
Yeah, and I'm really proud of us that in our workbook that's coming out, we have really nice exercises that talk about that really walk people through in like a journal sort of way, what they're hopeful for, what they're worried about, what they're fearful for, and then the next step of like, so if helping them just to think about if that happens, what if these fears happen, or what if this happens, what can I plan for? And if you really just spend a little bit of time, there are many ways to achieve this. And we've seen this where, we read about these stories of people, celebrating Christmas in August, or getting married early, or not even getting married legally, but just having the ceremony. I mean, there's so many ways that people can achieve the human meaning part of it without it having to be so, be controlled by the medical system. So I think in our workbook, we have some really nice exercises of how to do that based on all of these questions, um, that, yeah, that help people just not feel so it's so black and white and that they have to do one or the other.
I spoke about the provider side, but I would say from a patient family perspective, if you're a mix amongst you about, who's willing and wanting to walk 2 roads, um, I would say everyone counts, and I would encourage the person who feels like they want to walk 2 roads to basically come out and say that to their family. And, in our book, in our workbook, we give different phrases that might be comfortable to use.
Mhm.
For example, thank you so much. I know you love me. I know you want the best for me. And I love that. But can we also together just prepare for the just in case? I will feel better. That's helpful for me if I can also entertain the what ifs.
Mhm.
And, so we help people find the words to invite people in their crew to also walk 2 roads with them. And also not to get upset if someone won't. It doesn't mean you can't. You can still go ahead and walk 2 roads on your own for a bit. It'll still have benefit.
Yeah,
So,
that's exactly the phrase that, remember I talked about that New York Times story that Sarah
Mm.
Wyman, she exactly said that no one was inviting us. No one was inviting Orly to talk about it, let alone the mom and dad along the way. And it was 4 years that they were on this journey, and like, 4 years and the fourth cycle of chemotherapy that wasn't working. And so they use the word inviting, and I think it is the right
Mhm.
Mhm.
that we're just inviting people to entertain. And you can go as far as you want. People, when they're planning for the rest, they aren't necessarily planning for death and dying, they're just planning for what are the changes that can happen.
Mhm.
It's dying in death.
Thank you.
See, and I'm glad that you said that because it segues nicely into a story that's happening with a dear friend of mine. So her mom is at the end stage of kidney disease. And my friend called me and said, Maggie, I've Googled everything and everything adds up to my mom is at the end of life. But why did no one tell us? Why has no one talked to us about this? I'm so confused and I don't understand why.
Isn't that so horrible that someone would suddenly think, people have kept things from them? It's
Mhm.
just feels so dishonoring and mistrustful. Um, so, I feel sorry for your friend. Thank goodness people are able to find information that way. Um, but I think what happens is that healthcare providers get so busy doing the work that they're doing. They're so focused on the day to day that um, they don't pause and help people, think about, well, if this doesn't work, what we're doing right now, what's that going to look like? And do you want to talk about that? And the other thing is quite frankly, healthcare providers like to be positive. They don't want their patients and families to give up hope and to be sad and feel depressed. That's the huge assumption, by the way, that
Mhm.
healthcare providers, if they do entertain that other road, that they're going to make their patients feel worse. And they didn't go into healthcare to make people feel worse. So it's this ironic way of healthcare providers really wanting the best for their patients, but the neglect that's not purposeful actually does more harm.
So, Simi, what would you say to if we have healthcare providers listening who really want to do this, but maybe they haven't done it before because they're scared of what you said? What advice would you have for them?
Yeah, I would say be brave and lean in because having these kinds of conversations that are based in the foundation of truth and reality, and learning how to gently invite patients and families to both be hopeful, but also to talk about the reality of the illness, is actually what many patients and families are waiting for. You will be more trusted by your patients and their families. And you yourself will feel less helpless if you're able to stick with your patients and families through tender conversations, as Catherine Mannix would say. So don't run away from these awkward and uncomfortable moments. Lean in and be human and think about what you would want to know if it was your life, your time, your body. Uh, you would not want people around you to know what was happening, but you didn't know. And so trust that. And yeah, and tenderly invite people to know the truth of their illness. Ask them what they want to know. Ask them how much they want to know. Tell them things are going to change, that I'm here for you. It's like renewing your vows. I'm here for you, my patient. This illness I've seen before, lots. It has its twists and turns. There'll be moments that we need to make decisions. And, I want us to be able to talk openly about what's happening the entire time. And so that's the kind of thing I would say to healthcare providers. And that feels good.
Mhm, mhm,
And one thing that I have observed in the 4 years we've been doing this, from healthcare providers, they have changed. They often have learned to say, hope for the best, plan for the worst. Let's hope for the best and plan for the worst. And when they say that, it really scares their patients because the worst, conjures up this image. And so after meeting us, and I know one of them was like a very famous cardiologist or yeah, a palliative care clinician who does chronic heart failure, Nathan Goldstein and McGill. Remember, you said, he heard you speak, Sammy, and he's changed how he says it. He now says hope for the best and plan for the rest. And he's found that so much more inviting. And other clinicians have said that too, that was easy language for them to adopt, and it opened up new conversations. So I feel like it's exactly what you said, but when they say hope for the best, plan for the worst, it scares people because we know what the worst is, or it goes right to the end. And planning for the rest is not about the end; it's about the now and the tomorrow, and what can we do to make it your life better.
When you think about it, we walk two roads mostly in everyday life as well. I'm constantly thinking, all right, well, I'm going to go to the grocery store and I think I'm going to make this for dinner, but if it's not there, I need a backup plan. Or I'm going to take my car out today and I hope I have enough gas, but if I don't, what's my plan going to be? So
Yeah.
it is something we do naturally often. We can use this idea of walk two roads when we have a serious illness as well.
Yeah, I'm laughing because my kids have summer camp and we just booked all these summer camps, even though we might take vacation right over. We just It's our plan B, and we've just booked them in case, because it's kind of like Hunger Games when you're booking these camps. Parents will know, or going to college or applying to schools. You plan for your first choice, but all the others. But
Mhm.
the one and this, so Maggie, this is why this is my favorite key, because I think it is the most important thing. It is the gateway to planning ahead without it being scary. And in fact, I don't think I've told this story before, but uh, someone said, we were working with different people helping us when we were writing our book. They said, this is the most important key. You should call your book Walk Two Roads. And
Mhm.
I was so adamant against that because I'm like, that is so people are not going to get that. They're going to think it's a book about running. We'll have like running, Nike shoes on the front or something. But in fact, Walk Through It is hope for the best plan for the rest. And suddenly we realized, oh, that is the title. And actually, on many talks, people have said that phrase was the most helpful for them to understand what we were trying to talk about, that this beautiful whole person care is not reserved for the last days and weeks. It can be led by patients and early on.
I love it. So I think that's a great moment for us to wrap up the session, and see you all next week.
Okay, see you. Thanks for listening. Visit our website, waitingroomrevolution.com, to join our newsletter, learn more about the movement, check out our free resources, and see if we're coming to a city near you. This episode was produced by Cien Siao, Maggie Sivak, Kayla McMillan, and Shilpa Joythi Kumar. Our theme music is Maypool by Ketsa.